We are in the process of buying this house and hope to fix it up and use it for our family. The windows keep getting broken, though, and need to be boarded up in a more timely fashion.
The voice that you just heard was a neighbor calling about a vacant and abandoned property in South Bend, Indiana. I'm Kathryn Roos, Chief of Staff to Mayor Pete. When the mayor took office in 2012, he became the youngest mayor of a city with a population over 100,000 people. He brought a new approach and energy to the job, along with the desire to implement civic innovation. Partnering with Code for America was one part of his vision for civic innovation. We were able to bring the fellows to South Bend with the generous support of our community partners. When the fellows arrived in February, the mayor charged them with promoting a few key values. First, address basic quality of life issues like clean water, and trash pickup, and snow removal. Second, make sure that the decisions are based on the best available data. Third, promote innovation and transparency in how the government operates. The fellows have helped us achieve these goals in several ways, including drafting an open data policy and supporting the launch of an open data portal. People often say that bigger is better, but we're proud that South Bend is the smallest city in the US to have implemented these measures. The fellows also brought together a community of techies and engaged residents that has become Hack Michiana, a Code for America brigade. We know that the great work around civic tech will continue even after this year and the fellowship ends. And we're really excited. I got to do a shout out to the co-organizer of that group, Dan Newman, and the city's liaison, Chris Premer, who are here with us today. Now, I'm going to hand it over to one of our fellows, Tamara, who's going to talk about the great work that she and her colleagues did to take on these challenges.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. So I'm just one person on a team of three, along with Reed Ducey-Gibbs and Dave Guarino, who obviously are here today as well. When we got to South Bend in February, we really wanted to meet with everyone we could. So this meant community groups, city staff, business owners, to really understand the role that technology could play in addressing the needs of the city in the ways that Kathryn outlined. And in addition to what Kathryn was talking about, the mayor gave us an additional requirement, which is that we be able to explain the impact of our work to every citizen in terms that are simple enough for a grandmother at a bingo hall to understand. So we kept these ideas in mind as we began our work. Now, for those of you who don't know South Bend, the mayor just outlined some basic information about the city, but in terms of the vacant and abandoned houses, as South Bend lost population due to a shift in the structure of the economy and the closing down of factories, the city's population declined from a peak of about 133,000 in 1960 to just over 100,000 today. So that hole also meant that for the former residents, they left behind houses. And in concert with the recent financial crisis, this has meant that there are just over 1,000 vacant and abandoned houses in the city today. And it's easy to think of these as numbers, but as you all know, these kinds of houses are in active neighborhoods where engaged residents really care and have a stake in what happens to them. And so the mayor announced a vacant and abandoned property task force that looked into ways to address these houses. And when we were there in February, he announced an initiative that would address 1,000 homes in 1,000 days. So this was really central to what was going on there and was something that was really at the back of our minds as we were talking to community members. Now, the city's current process was using good data. When they were trying to figure out what to do with these houses, they were looking at market data, and they were also looking at information collected by code enforcement inspectors about the status of these houses. But the kinds of reports that might be relatively easy for us to read can often be difficult for community members to understand. And people had a lot of fear about what was going to happen in their communities if this question of addressing the houses meant demolition. So what we wanted to do was find a way that the voices of these community members could be included in this process, that they really felt included, and that their priorities were reflected in the actions of the city. So we wanted to combine these two kinds of information in a tool that would enable the city to take the actions that had the most positive impact on quality of life for the residents. So how do you go about doing that? Well, if you're familiar with community processes, there are often a lot of barriers to entry. So for people who are working during the day, it can be difficult to attend code enforcement hearings, which happen, at 3 p.m. twice a week. Similarly, community meetings that happen at night can be difficult for people who are working more than one job, or who need childcare, or who have mobility problems. These are very real problems to including everyone in these kinds of discussions. So while we were in the city, we talked to a lot of different neighborhood groups, but in particular, we spent time with the Monroe Park Neighborhood Association, and they met once a month, and on our trips back to South Bend, we attended their meetings as this group of people gathered in a church around a table along with a code enforcement inspector with a bunch of pieces of paper. And so they had information from the city about the status of the property and how much they thought repairs would cost, but they also scribbled their own notes and shared information. So they might say, I've seen someone working on this house over there, or, I know so-and-so bought that house there, or maybe even, there are squatters in house number 3. And so bringing this conversation together meant that people were passing information back and forth in a way that was really an intimate fashion. And so what we wanted to do was emulate this process and scale it up to the city level. And it was really important that we use appropriate technology. So what does that mean? Well, for people in these neighborhoods where there's a high concentration of vacant and abandoned properties, as you might imagine, a lot of them don't have regular access to the internet. So, a web app as the primary means of engagement didn't really make sense. Similarly, for the people who were impacted the most, in many cases, seniors, like that grandmother at the bingo hall, they weren't familiar with text messaging, and using that as a means of communication would actively exclude them from participation. And for people who have pay-as-you-go text messaging plans, those rates add up fast as messages get passed back and forth. So SMS was out as well. So what did that leave us with? Well, when you talk about innovation, this probably isn't the first thing that you think of, but for us, a telephone really made the most sense for including the community in this process. And so what we did was we built an application called City Voice. And this is a call-in system for collecting place-based information from the community, feedback from neighbors. And what it does is it combines the familiarity of a telephone call and that intimacy that you feel with the latest in technology using Twilio's APIs to get real-time information over the phone that people can listen to, and then at the same time, when they leave feedback, channel that directly to the right people in the city who can take action based on the information that people are contributing. What we did of these 1,000 properties was identify 250 where feedback from the community would have the most impact. And so on one Sunday, we went out with a crew of volunteers like Deb, who you see here, and placed these signs in the yards of the vacant and abandoned properties. And they had a couple of key pieces of information on them. Up at the top, there's information about the owner, but most importantly, there's the phone number that a neighbor can call into, along with a unique ID based on the address of that property. So when a neighbor calls City Voice, they're prompted to enter that code. And once they do that, there are a couple things they can do. The first is respond to a poll. So this is a question like, would you prefer to see this property removed or repaired? That gives the city structured data to tap into the pulse of the neighbors. They're also able to listen to others. This is that conversational aspect. So people can hear what other people, their neighbors or community members, have said about that same property, and they can leave their own feedback. So that might be explaining why that they think a particular property should be demolished, but it might also be articulating a new vision for what should happen to that house. And then finally, they can share contact information. So if they want follow-up from the city, they can get called back in order to continue that engagement. So we didn't neglect the web entirely. There's also a companion website where neighbors can do a couple things. They can find information on how to go about acquiring a vacant or abandoned property, and hopefully going to this source means that we can save departments like community investment and code enforcement some phone calls, and they can use their time in a better fashion. You can also search by address, browse the map for all the houses in the initiative, or listen to all of the comments that have been left about every property in South Bend. For some of the houses, like the one you see here, there were as many as 8 calls. And within the first 24 hours of putting these signs up on the properties, we had more than 50 calls. And to date, we've had calls for more than 100 properties in the city, which is a good percentage. And the feedback can be mixed. Sometimes there's a unanimous view that something should be removed or repaired. Other times, neighbors have conflicting opinions. But they're always able to explain what they want in articulate and often moving terms. So some people are really excited or agitated about getting a property removed.
Thank you for the opportunity. I feel that this home, after being a mess house, is never going to be able to be properly renovated. For the sake of the children in the community and the rest of the neighbors who have had to put up with this over the years, I think it should be torn down.
Other people will argue for repair for another property.
I live next door to 505 South Grant Street, which is up maybe for demolition, and I have had people come up to us and ask us if that house was for sale.
And sometimes people begin to have these conversations and they'll actually call back and change their mind.
Yes, I called earlier, and after talking to some of the neighbors, I have changed my mind, and that property probably should be destroyed because of the inside pipes and stuff. Someone who lived there last made a mess of them, and I guess they're saying that it would be more money to fix it than get rid of the house.
So we have all this information coming in. What are the actual impacts of City Voice? Well, first, as we just saw, people have conversations. Second, it enables the city to recommend action. So based on the volume of calls and the particular opinions that are expressed, the city can make a determination about whether it thinks it makes more sense to recommend that a particular house be repaired or demolished. And in the cases where demolition makes sense, the city can use its scarce resources to first target those houses where community members have said they're having the greatest negative impact on their lives. If people are ready to rehab a house, they can direct them to the right resources. So information on how to go about acquiring a property through a tax sale or a commissioner's certificate sale, or where they can find grant funding to do those repairs. And it's also had some unexpected outcomes, which is what you get when you engage in the kind of experimentation that we have. So the first is that by placing these signs in physical space in front of the houses, it's made truly visible the city's commitment to the Vacant and Abandoned Property Initiative, and that it's telling neighbors, listen, we really care and we care about what you have to say. It's also prompted some negligent landlords to action, sometimes repairing and sometimes, angry phone calls. And we've had interest from community groups in placing additional signs on properties in their neighborhoods, and the chief code enforcement inspector is also interested in doing that. But I think the primary thing that it's done has reminded us of the power of the human voice. We're really talking about changing that relationship, changing the tone and texture of the relationship between the city and the residents and community members. And voice is a powerful means for doing that. It's a simple, effective, and human way to really understand the story behind what we think of as data and to ensure that people hear and are heard.
It's refreshing to see that South Bend has taken an initiative to do something about the vacant houses.
Hi, I'm a Southeast Side resident, and I think it's great that, you know, you're giving people a chance to, get feedback, and other people, are seeing the houses and the telephone numbers and calling in to buy them.
I'm interested in acquiring this property and fixing it up, making it back, put it back on the tax rolls.
I'm very interested in that property. That used to be our family home that my granny had built. I'm really, truly interested in that property.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So thank you so much to Kathryn and our partners in South Bend. And during the break, we'll actually give you guys a chance to call in yourself on City Voice and hear what some of those comments from neighbors sound like.
Thanks to the CfA Fellows.